There we go. All right. So the goal of this is to talk about managing anxiety in this really uncertain time. And I appreciated getting to see the talks from before, and it's neat because these are friends of mine, Charlene and Susan, Lonnie. I haven't seen you guys in a couple of years, so it was just a nice thing to see you guys on the screen. You guys are all looking good, so that must be clean living, I guess. Um, with this presentation, this is one that I've developed that was largely initially designed for teachers and school staff. It turns out that, believe it or not, there's been a lot of stress this year related to teaching and being in schools. So that was initially my goal, was setting up how do you do self-care as a teacher, as an educator, and then realizing that this is now it goes to other areas as well. So I've done this with a church leadership setting, and done this in a couple of different places too. So this, I think, is universal stuff in this year of COVID. So just want to put in some thanks to a couple of school divisions that helped in funding this initially, Strathcona High School, a couple of psychologist colleagues of mine, Randy Poole and Bev Baker Hoffman, and then just kind of everybody that's involved in putting themselves at risk to work with kids and help out our kiddos. So from a parent perspective, my goals are understanding how the uncertainty that's gone on this year has led to this increase in anxiety and stress for kids as well as parents. To talk about self-care approaches that you can use and model for your children, and then developing practical ideas about ways to foster your own family's resiliency skills. And really building on something that Charlene had said, and I just want to emphasize this so much, that if I'm irritable, if I'm working too much, if I'm not taking care of myself, then this has a negative impact on me as a father. This means that I'm not going to be as playful as I would be. I'm going to be more irritable and cranky, and I'm not going to be able to do really the most important job, parenting my kids, as well as I would like to. So there's often this feeling around when I engage in self-care, I feel guilty about it. And I want to just try to pull that off the shelf as much as possible, that if you're feeling guilty about it, if for no other reason, do it for your kids, which is what your ultimate goal is anyway, is to provide support for them. So I just want to make it, the more that your mental health is good, the more that you're feeling good about yourself, the more success that you're going to have in your parenting, and you're going to be able to do that more effectively. So I just want to try to remove all guilt from that as much as I possibly can. So just something that's really obvious is that just about everybody has experienced stress to some degree related to COVID-19, the virus and its effects. And this has come out in all different kinds of ways. And I'll just throw out a handful of them. Over the last year, how many of you were scared for your own safety? Scared for the safety of your children, or the safety of your parents, the safety of extended family, the safety of your friends? Uh, uh, there's so many other things as well. Financial concerns. How many of you either lost a job, or were in fear of losing a job, in danger of losing a job? That creates a lot of stress. Worried about when your kids go back to school. Should you put your kids back in in-person school or not? Just a lot of stress in a lot of different ways. I kind of see it as for everyone, if the level that we have that tells us that we need to get mental health support is here, and the baseline in general is down here, knowing that there's some variability there. For all of us, everyone has been nudged up a bit. And so for some folks, that's kind of put them over this threshold, but for all of us, it's brought us closer to it. And knowing that we're all kind of consistently in this sense of anxiety, I think I think it's just important really to acknowledge that. For those of you that have kids that have done zones of regulation, to me, I see it as it's like all of society is in the yellow zone right now. We're all managing, but we're not doing a super awesome job of it. There's just a ton of stress that's happening all the way around. So a description of anxiety, Google describes it as a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. And then the DSM-5, which is the book that we use as mental health professionals that contains diagnoses in it, it defines anxiety as anticipation of future threat. So really, anxiety refers to stuff that's happening in the future, and generally things that we don't have a lot of control over, or at least a lot of perceived control over. So I'll distinguish that from stress, which Google says is a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances. So you can see the difference between these two. Stress is like a response to an environmental situation. So I'm writing an exam, I'm giving a presentation, talking to my boss, and then the stress goes away once the situation ends, like the test is over. But anxiety is an anticipation of something that'll happen in the future. And anxiety doesn't necessarily go away because we all have the future coming up in front of us. There's a million things that we can choose to focus our energy on and to be worried about and concerned about. The future is always coming up. So, waiting to get back my test mark, constantly thinking about interactions with my boss, with my spouse. And when you have persistent stress, this can lead to anxiety over time. We can manage stress to a reasonable degree, but we are not generally meant to manage a high level of stress really persistently day after day after day. As you are doing this, if you're parenting a kiddo on the autism spectrum, you can imagine these kinds of stressors that are coming up for you really regularly, that you get to a stage of not having as much difficulty in managing. For instance, like a awkward conversation with a school. A lot of you have become advocates in ways that you never really thought you would have to do. When a shy, introverted person has a child with special needs, they can get to where they can bang the table really effectively when they need to for their kids. And so this is a good thing we're all able to develop with stress. But we also know that when this stress is persistent, it can lead to trouble over time. When we get anxious, we get this really in two places, in the mind and in the body. When I do presentations, I put together the content myself, but I get my teenage daughter, one of them, to do the make it pretty, basically, because I tend to have like a gray background and nothing on it. So she'll pull out some clip art pictures and grab some things. And I like this because she does things that are a little different than the way I would do it. And this slide is a nice example of this. So an example, if you're experiencing anxiety and you feel lightning bolts kind of coming out of your head, or you're stuck in bed and doing this, or if green things are coming out of your face, this might be an indication of anxiety having an impact on you. So we see this in a lot of ways. With the two in particular, I'll break them into the mind and the body. So with the mind, this can come out as pervasive thoughts, like thinking about the same thing over and over again, chasing our tail, feeling stuck, not being able to move past something. And this has an effect on our ability to focus well. When we've endured some kind of trauma, or there's something that's going on in our mind, it makes it very, very hard for us to be able to focus on the work that we have to do. For kids, it makes it harder for them to be able to do their schoolwork. If they're worried about what they're going to eat when they get home, they're not going to be focused as much on long division. And then anxiety also can come out in the body. So it can come out as increased heart rate, can be tension, could be tension up here in the neck and shoulders. That's kind of where I get it. Some of us get a bit of a death grip on the steering wheel when we're driving home. Tension can come in lots of places. It can be butterflies in the stomach. Some of us will get tingling in different parts of our extremities, or goosebumps. It can happen in a lot of ways. Increased blood pressure can also be an impact of anxiety. So I bring these up. There's probably 15 or 20 different symptoms that exist across the population. And for any of us, we'd probably have 3 or 4 of those that are really big when we notice ourselves being anxious. And I bring this up because not everybody recognizes when they are anxious, that anxiety is, while it's a mental health diagnosis, when it's severe enough, almost all of us experience anxiety to some degree, but we may not necessarily be good at recognizing it. Certainly, when I was in elementary school back in the dark ages before electricity, I don't ever remember getting instruction on this at all. So I think that folks in our generation generally just don't get a ton of training or great understanding of it. I think we do a better job of this with our kids now. But I want to bring this up so that you can have an awareness of, if this is something that you're experiencing, there's a reason for this. Just as a quick sidebar, lots of people get panic attacks as well when they're super anxious, and this generally relates to or results in feelings of terror, feeling like I'm going to die, feeling like I'm losing control, or that I'm going crazy. Good news is that when this happens, this generally does not have a physical, there's not a physical impact of it. The bad news is that when people get this, it's really horrible. You often will go to emerge, they'll run tests, say, hey, nothing's wrong. And you're like, well, that's good. I'm not dying, but what is this and why is this, this could be happening again. About 1 in 3 people have experienced a panic attack at some point, but it's something that people very rarely discuss. And so if you're one of these people that has experienced it, know that There's about 1/3 of a million people in Edmonton that have had one of these as well. This is not an unusual thing at all. But this is where basically you get the mind and body connection, and they're kind of going haywire in a bit of a cycle. You're thinking about what you're stressed about, and your heart rate just starts going a million miles a minute. And then this, of course, if you notice your heart rate doing that, it kind of freaks you out in the mind too. So when we get anxious, and this I want to build on what Susan was talking about earlier, because I think this is so important. When we're dysregulated, or just not, when we're irritable, tired, angry, cranky, hungry, we're not able to use all of our cognitive skills to their fullest capacity. So if you think about a time that you got into an argument with your partner, and if you were trying to solve some kind of a complex problem, solving a math problem, or potentially something as simple as like opening a jar of pickles, all these tasks become a lot more difficult for us when we get angry. It's like our body is putting emphasis or a focus on physical response, when what we really need is a mental response. And so this is true for kids, but it's also true for adults. And so why this is important is that our expectations really need to be set accordingly, especially in this year where lots of us are experiencing a lot of stress and increased anxiety. And so what do we do about all this? The stress and anxiety, these are risks for everyone. And so the way we want to address it is to combat them with active self-care strategies. We focus on resiliency, mental health, and compassion for ourselves and others. So I'll spend about the next 5 or 10 minutes going through these and unpacking them, knowing that Susan and Adam and Charlene have already talked about these to some degree already. So I'm going to try to hit some of the highlights and reinforce some things. So with Google, or with resilience, I pulled out a Google definition. Susan unpacked this a lot more than I am. I'm just going to give it 2 slides. The Google definition is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties or toughness. I have my own definition of it, which is basically enduring something that sucks and living through it. The only way that we develop resiliency is by being involved in or living through adverse circumstances. And this is really tough for us that want to protect our kids. I don't want for my girls to experience anything negative in their lives, but I also know that if they don't experience anything like that, then as adults, they're not going to be prepared at all when they get a mark that they're not pleased with, when they have a sideways interaction with a roommate or a supervisor, they're not going to be able to manage these things very well. So I just put this in there as a bit of a caution. We want to expose our kids to what I call a safe failure. It's not a bad thing if your grade 8 student gets a 40 on an exam because they didn't study very hard for it, because that's not going to have a long-term impact on their life unless they continue to get those 40s and are not able to graduate from high school. But having a failure experience based on something that they didn't do that they should have done, that allows you an opportunity for growth. So I call it safe failure. We don't give kids the opportunity to do things like play in the middle of the street. And well, if they get hit by a car, well, they'll learn their lesson and they won't do that again. Yeah, but we don't want to do something that's catastrophic in terms of failure. It's giving them these chances to experience mild negative things that they can be able to learn skills to regulate themselves and to be able to manage it. And again, you only get these skills when you experience these difficulties. I really like this quote. You can actually do something about how you experience every day. You don't have to be a victim of the turmoil and unpredictability of the world. Change is a given in life. How you respond is within your control. And that's a lot of the thrust of how I want to close with this, is the importance of being active and taking charge of the part that you can control. Susan talked about focusing on what we can and what we can't control. There are millions of things out there, if I just read the news, that I can get angry and upset and worried and frustrated about. But this is not necessarily going to be positive for my mental health, and then in turn, not positive for my relationships, my parenting with my kids. And so knowing what I can control and then what I can't control, of course, the wisdom to know the difference is important. So developing these skills, and again, this is just, I'm going to hop onto what Susan had already described in a lot more detail. I'll do a couple of quick ones here. But just knowing that when we're taking care of ourselves, we can manage stressful situations better. Making sure that you have specific supports you can identify at work, at home, in your extended family, with your friends, knowing that I may use this friend to help in this way and that friend to help in another way. The same person doesn't have to solve all of my needs for me. Um, Reflecting on things that sucked what you've lived through. So this idea of you survived all of the 10 worst days of your life. And this doesn't mean that you enjoyed them. Certainly when I'm going through a resiliency building period in my life, that's not something where I'm like, yay, I get to build resilience. It's like, no, this is terrible and I don't like it. I know that there will be a good outcome at the end, but that doesn't mean that you have to enjoy the refining process as you're going through it. And this general idea of being active and not passive in addressing tough stuff. So creating a response rather than focusing on the loss, I think is crucial. When we get something negative that happens, it's really normal to feel self-pity and to be upset about that for a set period of time. And that's okay. That's a part of the grieving process. What's not okay is when that persists for months, years into the future without any resolution. And the way that we get that resolution is by having some kind of a response, doing something that allows us to make our situation better as much as we can. So, in unpacking self-care a bit, I again want to go to a definition and then pull out some of the individual pieces of it. So, the practice of taking an active role in protecting one's own well-being and happiness, in particular during periods of stress, is a nice definition for self-care. So, a couple of pieces with this active role, that means that we're in charge of this ourselves. It's not up to my wife or my kids to make me happy and to make sure that I'm taking care of myself. Ultimately, that's got to be my own choice. I have to be active for that to happen. If I'm not active and I don't take steps to do that, I'm inclined to work too much, to spend too much time internet surfing and doing things that are not going to be helpful for my growth and my happiness and development of joy. Well-being, this comes out in different ways. So physical well-being, emotional well-being, spiritual well-being, relational, these are all different parts of well-being. And these are all things that we can get away with neglecting for a little while. I can eat fast food for a few days at a time. Used to be for weeks on end. Now I can just get away with a few days at a time. And I can do that for a while, but I can't get away with that forever. I can get away without engaging spiritually for a while, but I'm not going to be successful if I'm doing that forever. This idea of surviving versus thriving. And a lot of what we're doing this year seems to be that we're in this survival mode, but we don't want to be there forever. I want to get to where I can thrive and where I can continue to grow. And so this is a part of our self-care too. And then happiness. Just this is a slide that you don't need to have a PhD to figure this out. The idea of what makes you happy. So thinking about that for yourself, what is it that makes you happy? And then the follow-up to that is, why don't you do more of that? As long as it's something that is healthy for you, that's not causing you distress or harm, and something that doesn't hurt someone else, then doing more of the things that make you happy is a very nice, simple way of doing it. And so protecting our happiness means making sure that we identify what these things are and then carving out some time for it. If I want to make sure that I have time for something, I put it in my Google Calendar. And then it's more likely if it's just right there, okay, I'm blocked off from 7:30 to 8:30 to do this. So making sure that we take steps to do this, because otherwise parenting can take up all of our time. You could spend 100 hours a week doing this. We can find other things that will take up all of our time too. We just need to have the right kind of balance. Some quick work self-care strategies. So this is when you are when you're working, and working can include parenting in a really heavy role. Really basic things like hydrating, eating decently, take movement breaks. This is something that is we're learning more and more about just in the past few years around the importance of not sitting and being in the same spot for hours on end. Um, If I give this slide, it tells me to hydrate, and that reminds me, hey, I'm thirsty. Trying to do things that make you laugh, things that make you happy, amusing yourself when you are working or when you're parenting, even if no one else gets the joke, that is totally okay. As long as you're entertaining yourself, that's what matters here. Other self-care strategies that are important, sleep is one. And this, I just can't emphasize enough the importance of this. And a lot of you are rolling your eyes at me saying, I haven't had a good night's sleep since my kids were born. And I totally get that. The more that your sleep is impacted, the less you're going to be able to function at 100%, because it's going to impact you cognitively. It's going to impact your irritability. And so if you're one of these people where you're not getting the sleep that you need, I'd say do what you can to make that an emphasis. And if that means getting medical support for that, then I think that's an important thing to consider as well. What's the best way that you can get that? Because wow, those good nights of sleep really have an impact. Ensuring physical exercise and activity. This is one of the most basic self-care, depression prevention strategies that we have. When I'm working with someone in therapy who comes in because they're depressed, one of the first go-tos they'll have is, what are you doing for physical activity? This doesn't have to be huge. It can be walking, but it needs to be something. Planning fun things. We've had very few vacations over the last year, but there's some science behind the idea that planning a vacation and then the memories that you have post vacation can be as gratifying as the vacation itself, believe it or not. So the more that you can plan those kinds of things, that's something that's going to be positive for you. Again, laughing, focusing on your blessings. So having an attitude of where you're taking gratitude, you're showing gratitude of the blessings that you have. That I could do an hour on that all by itself, and I'll skip it. But I just want to emphasize that when we can be gracious for the things that we have that we've received, this tends to make our outlook much better. And then giving of yourself. There's some nice evidence that as we give of ourselves and we volunteer, this is something that helps us to feel better too. So you can even do this selfishly. More complex strategies, knowing I've got just a couple of minutes left, but generating goals, and in particular, SMART goals. So specific, measurable, realistic, achievable, and time-sensitive goals. Really specific things like I'll volunteer for 3 hours once a month rather than I'll try to be a better person. Making sure that you have something to look forward to each day is a good strategy. Developing a mission statement. Some people this really speaks to. I like the idea of it. When I talk about this with my wife, she just rolls her eyes. This is not her bag. So if this speaks to you, great. And if not, that's okay. Journaling is kind of fits in that category as well. I tried to journal because I know about the mental health benefits that allegedly come from it. I just can't do it. I just don't, that doesn't seem to be one of my gifts. So, but a lot of people, they really get benefit from this. It's a nice way of being able to process your day. Having an accountability partner who can help to ensure this balance between physical, emotional, spiritual, and relational health can help as well. This slide is I really like this. If you're one of these people that has a hard time with evaluating how you're doing or being insightful or introspective about yourself, this is a nice, very practical way of doing it. So as you know, when you pass someone that you know in the hallway, you know, as good Canadians, we say one of two, they say, hey, how you doing? We'll say either I'm fine or not too bad. And that's kind of the end of the conversation. That's socially appropriate and it's okay, but it doesn't really give us much opportunity to be able to reflect. And so this is a nice way of breaking this down into different categories. So they've got 5. One is work. So how's work or school? Are you satisfied with your work? Working too much? Working not enough? A second is love. How are your relationships? How's your family? Are you feeling loved? A third is play. Are you taking time to have some fun and do things that you enjoy? The fourth is sleep. Are you sleeping well with trouble either getting to sleep or staying asleep? And then 5, how about eating? Eating too much, eating too little, eating the right things. For any of us, as we look around these 5, we can see things that we're doing well and things that we're not doing so well. For me, love is an area that's currently a strength. Work, I have to be careful because I can work too much. And then when the work is too much, then that impacts the sleep. So all these things are interconnected. But for all of us, we should have something that we're good at and then something that's not currently great. So just in closing, 3 strategies to help yourself cope. One is adjusting your expectations. So when we're stressed, we're not going to be perfect, and neither is anyone else. So that includes your friends, your kids, customers, colleagues, people I see in the grocery store. We're all operating at not 100% these days. And so when I can let go of my perfectionism and my natural tendency to judge people based on if they have a different philosophy around masks than I do, it makes my life better. And so knowing that everyone is kind of doing the best we can with what we've got, I think is really important for this year. Making sure that you're reflecting on things that went well each day. We tend to, as humans, focus on the stuff that goes badly. If I get back a test and I got an 80 on it, I don't look at the 80 I got right. I look at the 20 I got wrong. And then you want to do some of that because you want to be able to grow, but you just want to give it the right balance, the right amount of time. And setting decent boundaries. You know, you can always work 100 hours a week if you want to, but that's not going to help you out in the long run. And knowing that seeking help is a sign of confidence and strength, not weakness. Second is being aware of your own emotions and that of your colleagues. Really, that should be kids here, I think. So checking your mood daily, using that daily 5 approach, taking those breaks that we talked about, and knowing about ways to take care of yourself when your tank is close to empty. If you find that you're more weepy, more irritable than you would like to be, it's probably a bit of a sign of stress and anxiety that are going on. Focus on your kids. Why do you love them? What do you love about them? How can you do more things with them that are going to improve the mood for both of you? And just generally understanding each other and being kind. So quick to forgive, slow to speak, slow to anger. And again, when we're quicker to anger, that's a cue that we're stressed out. If you need to talk about a problem with someone, make sure that you're doing it in a time when you're calm. If you're freaking out, the ability to solve that problem is not going to be great. When you see people argue on Facebook, it never ends with, oh, I see your point and I understand where you're coming from, thank you. No, it always gets a whole lot worse. So when we are able to talk calmly with people that we like and that we love, we're going to be able to be more successful with it. And then when to get professional support. So most professional support or most support, by the way, is not done by psychologists. Most good therapy, most good advice is given by pastors, bartenders, hairstylists, neighbors. It's from people that we interact with on an everyday basis. So you don't always have to have a psychologist, but there's specific times where that can be helpful. So if you've tried strategies but nothing is helping, you're in regular distress and feeling anxious or depressed more days than not, and you're kind of stuck and not able to make it better. If you're having trouble just getting up out of bed or doing things that used to be easier or not finding enjoyment in anything that you're doing, and persistent thoughts of self-harm, these are all signs about getting professional support. And a lot of you would have an EAP or an EFAP through work. And so knowing that you have some benefits that are available, certainly for our kids, accessing Alberta Health Services for support can be an approach to take as well. So so that is all I've got. I kept you a little bit late, but I appreciate the chance to present with you guys.